Welcome to the 2014 EWTN Family Celebration, The Joy of the Gospel from Birmingham, Alabama. Please join us for the address by host of Living the Discerning Life, Father Timothy Gallagher, which was presented at the 2014 EWTN Family Celebration. Father Gallagher is the host of one of our series, including naming the Living the Discerning Life, and it's a wonderful set of books he has available, and that DVD series is also quite wonderful. So Father was ordained in 1979 as a member of the Oblates of the Virgin Mary, a religious community that is dedicated to retreats and spiritual formation according to the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius. Now, Father Gallagher, as I mentioned, is author of 7 books. They're all very, very good on the spiritual teaching of St. Ignatius of Loyola, and of the life, that was a recent one, on Venerable Bruno Latteri, who was the founder of the Oblates of the Virgin Mary. And we recently did that book. It's a very interesting story if you want to find out about his life. And of course, he has been a frequent guest on many of our shows, including EWTN's Bookmark. And of course, he's a best-selling author, like I said. And he may be the kind of priest who speaks quietly and gently, but his words really do ring like thunder. This is Father Timothy Gallagher.
Mike, as we start, I'd like to begin the way now St. John Paul II began repeatedly anything of importance during his pontificate, by entrusting it to Mary. And so together with you, I'd like to entrust our mutual poverty in speaking and listening to her in this next hour, in the very sure confidence that placed in her mother's heart, what we do in this hour will be a work of God's grace in our hearts. And let's put that entrustment into words by praying the Hail Mary together. Hail Mary, full of grace. What we're going to do in this talk this afternoon, let's see, let me get the first slide up there. Okay. Is to simply introduce this teaching of St. Ignatius of Loyola on discernment of spirits. I've been teaching this now for about 30 years, and it's what has driven this is how effective people find this in dealing with the ordinary experience of every day. You and I all know that there are ups and downs in the spiritual life, that there are times when our hearts feel the warmth of prayer, when we look forward to reading Scripture or to being present at Mass or to taking new steps in the spiritual life. And then we don't always know why. Times come when it seems as though the bottom drops out of that energy. And if we're honest, on those days we hardly even want to pray and maybe even let some of our prayer go. It's hard to feel energy for taking new steps in the spiritual life and the rest. These kinds of ups and downs are going on all the time. Now, Ignatius of Loyola is not the only one in the Church's tradition who has described this ordinary daily spiritual experience, but no one in the Church's tradition has described it as practically, as concretely, and as usably as St. Ignatius of Loyola. So just as all in the Church look to Francis of Assisi when we want to live gospel poverty, all in the Church look to John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila when they want to learn about different states of prayer, or to St. Benedict for the liturgy. In the same way, the entire Church looks to Ignatius of Loyola for help in making sense out of, which is all discernment means, these ups and downs that go on all the time in the spiritual life. Now, the way I'd like to approach this is to look at the text that you have on your handout, on the first page of your handout. And this is from what is called the autobiography of St. Ignatius. Now, as you look at the text, you'll see that it's not written in the first person singular. I read them over, I became rather fond, I found written there. But it's written in the third person singular. And the reason why we have an autobiography that is written in the third person singular is that In the latter years of his life, at the repeated insistence of his Jesuit companions, Ignatius finally understood God wanted this, sat down with one of his Jesuit companions, and just talked about the earlier years of his spiritual journey. This Jesuit later wrote it down, which is why we have an autobiography in the third person, if that makes sense to us. And this is the text in which Ignatius recounts the pivotal moment of his life at age 30, when his heart turns from a very worldly life to the beginning of the life of sanctity that we know. Now, to put this in context, if we can speak of what I'll call a spectrum of sanctity, on this end of the spectrum, we have people whose lives are very far from God, have dramatic conversions, and begin to live lives of great holiness moving toward God. Which saint obviously comes to mind when I mention this pattern of holiness? Obviously, St. Augustine. With all kinds of nuances across the spectrum, on the other end, we have people who just seem to start very close to God and just keep getting closer. Which saint easily comes to mind when we mention this paradigm of sanctity? St. Therese of the Child Jesus. In our own time, I would think St. John Paul II also fits that pattern. Blessed Mother Teresa, St. John Bosco, and many others. Now, on that spectrum, Ignatius is solidly over here with Augustine until the age of 30. To say it nicely, there probably was not one of the 10 commandments that in those years Ignatius did not break in some pretty serious way. Just as anecdotes of this, when Ignatius is 24 years old, he comes back to his native town up in the northwestern corner of Spain, in the Basque Country, 16th century Spain. And that night, the legal document tells us, together with one of his brothers, commits what is simply described as an enormous crime. It was discovered the next morning. Ignatius immediately fled, or he would have fallen into the hands of the law. We also have documents which show Ignatius for 3 consecutive years asking permission of the King of Spain to carry a sword in public, probably much like permission to carry firearms publicly today, and to be accompanied by 2 attendants. And the reason that Ignatius gives is that there is a man who is utterly determined to take his life. Now, and this man actually took steps toward that goal. Now, we don't know what Ignatius did to so anger this man, but knowing the way Ignatius was living in those years, it's probably not hard, at least, to guess. And then a final anecdote of this. When Ignatius is now at Pamplona, and the decisive moment is getting near, one day Ignatius is walking through the narrow streets of this old Spanish city, when a group of young men come down the street in the other direction. There are political tensions behind this. And the witnesses tell us that if Ignatius had not been restrained, he would have drawn his sword and either killed or been killed. This is Ignatius until the age of 30, filled with visions of glory and honor in the world and romantic exploits and deeds of arms and chivalry and all the rest. Then, when Ignatius is in Pamplona, the French send an overwhelming army south across the border to take the city of Pamplona. The people of Pamplona know that they cannot defend against an overwhelming army of this size, and the city surrenders, with the exception of the castle in the city. And Ignatius is in the castle, to whom it appears so shameful simply to surrender that he inspires all the others to what they all know is a hopeless defense of the castle. But Ignatius was never an easy man to resist. When the French learn that the castle is not going to surrender, they simply bring their cannons up and begin the bombardment. Gradually, the walls begin to crumble. And in the bombardment, one cannonball passes between Ignatius's legs, damaging the left leg, but completely shattering the right. Ignatius falls, and with his fall, the defenders immediately surrender. And Ignatius tells us in his autobiography that the French were so impressed by the courage of this 30-year-old Spaniard that they treated him with great respect, and in fact themselves carried him on a stretcher a journey of some days back to his native town of Aspatia. When Ignatius arrives, the house and the room are still there if you ever go on pilgrimage. It's a large house built in castle style, and the upper 4th story is the room where Ignatius is now present. When he returns, they bring the doctors to look at his leg, his right leg. And the doctors tell him that whether because the leg was set poorly on the battlefield or in the jostling on the way home, the bones are no longer aligned properly, and the leg will not heal unless they break the bones, re-break them, and reset them. Now, they had no anesthesia in those days. And they do it. And Ignatius comes to the point of death and then begins to recover. When he has recovered enough to be aware of the condition of his leg, he realizes that beneath the knee on the right leg, one bone lies on top of another. And so there's a large protruding piece of bone. If you can think of seeing paintings of refined Spanish dress in Ignatius's time, you remember that the men wore tight-fitting clothing up to the knee. And so to have this protruding piece of bone on his leg was a social disfigurement. And Ignatius refused to go through life like this man who was so concerned about his appearance and honor and the rest. And so Ignatius insists with the doctors that they cut away the protruding piece of bone. They tell him it's going to be much more painful than the preceding operations. It's already healed. It's going to take time. Ignatius convinces them. They do the operation once more. Ignatius tells us that in all of these surgeries, he never says a word or makes no sign of the pain that he's going through other than the tight clenching of his fists. After this final surgery on his leg, obviously the right leg is a little shorter than the left. In fact, Ignatius would limp somewhat for the rest of his life. And the doctors, in order to do what they could to stretch the leg, apply instruments and weights to it. And the time comes now when Ignatius, on his convalescent bed, is healed in every way, except that he cannot yet use his leg. And the days are long, and to pass the time, Ignatius asks for reading. Now, the reading he has in mind, as he tells us, is the kind of reading that was parodied, for example, in Don Quixote. Knights and chivalry and romance and all the rest of it. But his sister-in-law gives him the only two books that she has in the house. And one is A Life of Christ, and the other is a volume of Lives of the Saints. And somewhat unwillingly, to pass the time, Ignatius begins to read. Now, if you'll take your text, he describes what happens as he begins to read. As he read them over, these two books, many times, he became rather fond of what he found written there. Putting his reading aside, he sometimes stopped to think about the things he had read, and at other times about the things of the world that he used to think about before. Now, if we can just note that the experience at this point is on the level of thoughts. He's describing the different kinds of thinking that he's doing. In our parlance today, we speak of head and heart. He's describing experience on the level of the head, on the level of thoughts, which immediately makes a very important point for the spiritual life. The way we think has a lot to do with what will happen in our spiritual lives. Of the many vain things that presented themselves to him, one took such a hold on his heart that he was absorbed in thinking about it for 2 or 3 or 4 hours without realizing it, which is remarkable if you stop to think about it. I wonder if any one of us has come to him or herself with a start and realized I was so engaged in thinking about something that 2 or 3 or 4 hours just passed. Ignatius is deeply, deeply engaged in these thoughts about this particular worldly project. He imagined what he would do in the service of a certain lady, the means he would take so he could go to the country where she lived, the verses, the words he would say to her, the deeds of arms he would do in her service. He became so conceited with this that he did not consider how impossible it would be, because the lady was not of the lower nobility, nor a countess, nor a duchess, but her station was higher than any of these. Now, as you can imagine, the scholars over the centuries have wondered who the lady might have been. This was all Ignatius ever said about it. He never spoke any further about it. One very real possibility is that this was Catherine, the younger sister of Charles, the King of Spain. Ignatius would have seen Catherine on a few occasions when he was something like a page in the household of the royal treasurer. Now, even as Ignatius spends hours, day after day, pondering how he's going to win the heart of this woman, he recognizes that in the aristocratically stratified culture of his day, Ignatius, who is a member of nobility, but very low and local nobility, is never even going to have access to a woman whose condition is higher than the highest rank of nobility, and most likely royalty. So that there is a note of unreality in this intense engagement and thinking about this project. Something does not ring true. But grace is also working. Nevertheless, our Lord assisted him, causing other thoughts that arose from the things he read to follow these. While reading the life of our Lord and of the saints, he stopped to think, reasoning within himself. And if you'll notice, you'll see very soon why I'm pointing this out. Ignatius is still describing his thoughts. He's still on the level of the head of our thinking and understanding. Other thoughts, stopped to think, reasoning within himself. And here is his famous question. This man who never really took the spiritual life seriously ever before. What if I should do what St. Francis did? What if I should do what St. Dominic did? Which is a remarkable thing. For the first time, he's encountering another kind of heroism. And his first thought is, if these men and women were this heroic in God's service, why should I not do the same thing? So he pondered over many things that he found to be good, always proposing to himself what was difficult and serious, their penances and arduous tasks in God's service. And as he proposed them, they seemed to him easy to accomplish, easy to accomplish. This is a man who, for the sake of his appearance, can ask that bone be cut away without anesthesia. As they say, there was never anything half measure about Ignatius. But his every thought was to say to himself, St. Dominic did this, therefore I have to do it. St. Francis did this, therefore I have to do it. These thoughts also, like the worldly project, lasted a good while. But when other matters intervened, the worldly thoughts mentioned above also returned, and he spent much time on them. This succession of such diverse thoughts, either of the worldly deeds he wished to achieve, winning the favor of a woman who is unattainable, or the deeds of God, living like the saints, that came to his imagination, lasted for a long time, and he always dwelt at length on the thought before him until he tired of it and put it aside and turned to other matters. Now we're at the threshold of the moment that will change his life. But to understand it well, let's focus what's happening right now in the experience. Thus far, Ignatius is describing what's happening in his thoughts. Here is an afternoon where Ignatius lies on his convalescent bed and spends 2, 3, 4 hours pondering how he'll win the favor of this woman who in reality is unattainable. Now, no matter how engaging thoughts are, eventually you grow tired. Ignatius just eventually lets the thoughts go and the day goes on. The next afternoon, Ignatius spends 2, 3, 4 hours intensely engaged in thoughts of a holier project, living like the saints. Again, eventually his energies grow tired. Ignatius lets the thoughts go and the day continues. The next day, intense engagement in thoughts of the worldly project, followed by intense engagement of thoughts about the holy project, worldly project, holy project. Can you see the succession of what's going on day after day as Ignatius lies on his convalescent bed? And now the moment of grace approaches. Yet there was this difference. When he was thinking about the things of the world, he took much delight in them. Now let's notice the word delight. Can you see that for the first time the dimension of the heart has come into the experience? Feelings, emotions, affective stirrings, delight. Now Ignatius is beginning to notice what's going on in his heart as he's thinking these various thoughts. When he was thinking about the things of the world, he took much delight in them. But afterward, when he was tired and put them aside, he found that he was dry and discontented. And you can hear again that is heart-level language, dry, discontented, not quite happy, something too empty in his heart. But when he thought of going to Jerusalem barefoot and eating nothing but herbs and undergoing all the other rigors that he saw the saints had endured, not only was he consoled, which is heart-level language, something happy, uplifting, not only was he consoled when he had these thoughts, but even after putting them aside, he remained content and happy, which again, obviously, is heart-level language. And now he describes the pivotal moment so simply that you could go right by it as you read it. Sometimes this happens in the writing of spiritual figures like this. He did not notice this, however, nor did he stop to ponder the difference until one time his eyes were opened a little. That's what we have in the slide. That's what the artist is depicting there. This is the moment when Ignatius' eyes are suddenly opened for the first time, spiritually speaking, until one time his eyes were opened a little, and he began to marvel at the difference and to reflect upon it. Being Ignatius, he doesn't just go by it, but he stops to ponder and explore it, realizing from experience that some thoughts left him sad and others happy. Little by little, he came to recognize the difference between the spirits that agitated him, one from the demon and the other from God. Now, with reverence, let's stay on this page. I want to work with this just a little bit longer. With reverence, because we are approaching here something very holy in Ignatius's life. I'd like to do an exercise which will introduce us into discernment. And I'm looking now at the fourth paragraph of this account. When he was thinking about the things of the world, so this is the head level. This is the level of the thoughts. When Ignatius is thinking about the worldly project, what is his heart experiencing? What's his word? Delight. So while he's thinking about trying to win the favor of this unattainable woman, there's something engaging about this. It awakens enthusiasm and energy in him. He experiences delight. But when eventually his energies grow tired and he stops thinking about this worldly project and the day goes on, what is his heart now experiencing? His heart is dry and discontented. Now there's something empty, something not really happy, something too shallow, something too superficial somehow in his heart. But when he thinks about living like the saints, the holy project, going to Jerusalem barefoot, eating the penances and so on, not only was he consoled when he had these thoughts, so that while he is thinking about living like the saints, his heart is consoled, happy, uplifted, warmed. But even after, when his energies grow tired and the day goes on and he lets these thoughts go, what is his heart now experiencing? His heart is what? Content and happy. And this pattern is going on day after day, week after week. And Ignatius doesn't even see it, doesn't even know it's happening, until one day his eyes are opened a little and he sees it and marvels at it, realizing that while both sets of thoughts, while he's thinking them, are both engaging and delightful and energizing, what happens in his heart after he stops thinking about the worldly project and what happens in his heart after he stops thinking about living like the saints is radically different. Here his heart remains empty and unhappy. Here his heart remains content, happy before the Lord. Now, once Ignatius becomes aware that this is going on, that one kind of thinking leaves him unhappy and another leaves him happy, he works with it. He tells us he reflects on it, he ponders it, he explores it, until he begins to understand that a set of thoughts about living in a certain way which are engaging in themselves but which always leave him unhappy does not have the feel of where God is leading in his life. Whereas another set of thoughts which are also engaging while he's thinking about them but always leave his heart happy, that has the feel of where God is leading in his life. And once Ignatius understands this, he acts accordingly. From that day, Ignatius will never take a step to pursue the worldly project. And from that moment, as soon as his leg heals, actually before it even heals properly, Ignatius leaves everything, sets off riding across northern Spain on a mule, goes to the Benedictine monastery at Montserrat near Barcelona, spends 3 days preparing and making a life-changing confession, goes down for the better part of a year to nearby Manresa, a small city, lives in a hostel serving the poor and the ill, goes to Mass each morning, returns in the evening to assist at the singing of Vespers, and during the day spends hours in a cave, which is now a chapel of a retreat center, on the steep bank of the river over which the city is built, contemplating, praying with Jesus in the Gospels. Does imitate and actually exaggerates. He's young at this. He has no guidance yet. The penances of the saints, damages his health in some ways, finds a better balance with the help of a confessor, goes on pilgrimage to Jerusalem, comes back and begins the studies that lead him toward priesthood, and a life of holiness is underway. Now, let's ask this question. What if that day Ignatius' eyes had not been opened a little? What would have been different in his life? And what would have been different, for example, in the life of his fellow student in Paris, Francis Xavier, and the church in Asia? Or not many years later, the Jesuit St. Edmund Campion and his companions and the church in England? St. Peter Claver and the church in Latin America, the North American martyrs. Among other things that would have been different, you and I would not be gathered here this afternoon exploring this topic. The ripples of grace that have gone out in the church and the world because one man's eyes were opened just a little to begin to notice the spiritual experience in his heart and its related thoughts, continue to go out and bless the church and the world. Let me ask a second question. Everyone who is here, we're here because we love the Lord, because we want to grow in holiness. What will happen in your life and mine if we can begin to live with our spiritual eyes open just a little, to begin to notice the spiritual experience in our hearts and our thoughts, begin to understand it, able to reject what is not of God and embrace and follow what is of God? The same two things will happen in our lives that happened in Ignatius' life this day. A grace-filled step in further transformation and holiness, and a life-filled and grace-filled step toward renewal in the church. You know, he was a key figure in the renewal of the church after the Reformation in the 16th century. Today we call it new evangelization. We will become, if we can live the discerning life, we will become increasingly agents of a new evangelization. Would you take now the second page of the handout, and I want to read with you just the first 3 lines of this text. These are the 14 rules or guidelines for discernment of spirits that Ignatius later composed. And Ignatius tells us that these are rules, that is, short, practical texts which help us understand what discernment is, and above all, give us many tools for living this in our lives. Rules for becoming aware. And there you see the first step in discernment is just to notice. If I may reverently ask this, what was in our hearts as we awoke this morning, as we were getting started? Did we notice? Was there something happy? Was there something anxious or heavy? What about this last week, the last 6 months, the last years in our life? The first step is just to be aware, just to notice that this is going on. Rules for, firstly, becoming aware, and then the second step is understanding. Now that I'm aware that these delights and dryness and attractions and hope and resistance and so on are going on in my heart and in my related thoughts, to work with it until I understand what it means spiritually. In these attractions, yes, this is God at work. In these resistances, no, this is not God at work. We work with it until we come to that second step, which is to understand its spiritual meaning. understanding to some extent the different movements which are caused in the soul: dryness, delight, discontent, hope, anxiety, love, gratitude. And then the third step is the active step, to take action. If the movements are good and of God, to receive them, to follow them, as Ignatius does. And if they are bad and not of God, then to reject them. And that's what we mean by discernment of spirits. If you and I are asked, what is discernment of spirits? We answer, discernment of spirits is a way of living. Discernment of spirits is a spiritual action, a spiritual operation. Let's use Ignatius' own word. Discernment of spirits is a spiritual exercise which asks us to be aware, to live with our eyes opened a little, just noticing what's going on in our hearts and our thoughts. And once we have become aware that these things are stirring in our hearts and thoughts, to work with it until we understand its spiritual significance and know what is of God and not of God in these stirrings of our hearts and thoughts. And once we've understood this, to take action accordingly, accepting, drinking in, being guided by living according to what we know is of God, and firmly rejecting what we now see is not of God, so that it can never, ever lead us astray. That's what we mean by living the discerning life. You can see, by the way, from just these first lines that we've read here, that this text of the rules is autobiography. Ignatius learned these rules by observing his own experience and that of others, and then codified it in language that can help the rest of us. Now, what I'd like to do next is simply run through, I'm not going to read the text, we don't have time for it, but simply run through the essential content of the 14 rules that follow. So you have them on the remaining pages, but without looking at the text, I'm just going to summarize the content of each rule. In the hope, this is like putting out a menu. This is a menu more than a meal. In the hope that the menu will feel attractive enough so that we'll want the meal, so that we'll pursue learning about this. The first two rules are a pair. And what Ignatius does in the first two rules is to describe how the good spirit and the bad spirit work in two different spiritual situations. The first would be like the young Augustine or the young Ignatius, or reverently anyone today who is in this situation of living a life that is moving in a pretty confirmed way away from God and into serious sin. As a college sophomore who stopped going to Mass when he went to college, has gotten into promiscuity and the rest. Anyone who is in this situation where their life is moving away from God and towards serious sin. And then in the second of Ignatius's rules, he's going to describe how the good spirit and the bad spirit work in a person who is sincerely striving with all our human weakness, but sincerely, and here Ignatius is speaking to all of us, sincerely striving to overcome sin and to rise from good to better in God's service. A person who loves the Lord and is sincerely striving to grow in that. In the first situation of a person who is heading away from God and towards serious sin, Ignatius says what the bad spirit does is to bring sensual pleasures to the imagination. That college sophomore shuts off the smartphone at 1 o'clock in the morning after an hour and a half on websites. What kind of images fill his imagination? Which spirit is at work? This is the classic tactic of the enemy, Ignatius says, in a person who is heading away from God and towards serious sin, to fill the imagination with sensual pleasures. Obviously, this keeps the person moving in this way if the person is not aware, does not understand, and in this case does not reject. However, grace is these rules are a spirituality of grace, of redemption. Grace is always working in such persons, because what the good spirit is doing in this college sophomore or anyone in this situation is stinging and biting in the conscience of the person. When that college sophomore or anyone, the young Augustine, remember how he says, "You lashed me with the twin scourge of fear and shame"? It's the action when the college sophomore shuts off the smartphone and finally is alone to be in touch with what's really in his heart, he's not happy. Something stings and bites. This is the action of the good spirit who loves every one of God's children too much ever simply to let them go, and who will sting and bite in the hope that the person will receive this and make the one change that can truly make the human heart happy. In the second spiritual situation, which is the situation that I can reverently say I'm sure unites all of us here, and which Ignatius has in mind now in the rest of the rules. When a person loves God and sincerely wants to grow toward God, what the bad spirit is going to do, Ignatius says, is to bite and to gnaw. Where did the joy go that I used to feel in my spiritual life? Saddens, things get heavy, places obstacles. You're never going to be able to take these new steps in prayer. You're never going to overcome that struggle with that sin or that vice. You're never really going to be different. Obstacles, it's too difficult, you'll never do it. It's all a lie. Again, what if we could be aware, understand, and in this case reject? Disquieting with false reasons, getting things explained in our hearts in a way that simply troubles us with false reasons. The enemy is always the liar. But in these same persons, grace is always at work, and the good spirit gives courage and strength. A woman rises, she's living a new life of prayer and growth toward God. She goes to daily mass, but her heart is heavy. Maybe there's a problem of health. There are financial problems in the family. She assists at mass, listens to the reading. Something in the homily speaks to her heart. At communion, her heart is warmed. She leaves the church with new courage and strength, the action of the good spirit in a person striving to grow toward God. Consolations, when our hearts grow happy in the Lord, we'll come right back to that. The tears that express that consolation. Inspirations, when I see it, now I know what I need to do. It becomes clear. Easing and taking away all obstacles. No, it's not that hard. Look at all these others who have done it. They had the same humanity as you. It doesn't depend on your strength. It's God's love and grace. He won't let you down. And suddenly the obstacles melt away, and we feel the freedom to take the new steps. That's the action of the good spirit. In Rule 3 and 4, which are also a pair, Ignatius describes the two basic spiritual movements. Spiritual consolation. Consolation, which is an uplifting movement of the heart on the spiritual level, when our hearts are happy in the Lord. I went to communion today, and I really felt the Lord's presence, and I felt my heart go warm with the love of the Lord. Beautiful experiences of spiritual consolation. And Ignatius describes a series of these. When, like this, the soul is warmed with love of God, and in that warmth loves other things in the truest way in their Creator. Tears. The woman is at Mass with her heart heavy, problems of health, financial problems, and at communion feels the Lord's presence with her. You're with me, Lord. You won't abandon me. And just the beginning of a tear comes to her eye. These are beautiful experiences of spiritual consolation. Increase of hope, faith, and charity. Increase of hope. I begin my daily time of prayer. It feels somewhat dry. But maybe 10 minutes into it, something in the scripture speaks to me. And now I begin to feel, Lord, I'm glad I'm here. You have more yet to give me. There's a very perceptible increase of hope, and likewise of faith and charity. And in consolation, there is a joy that attracts us to what Ignatius calls heavenly things. You and I know that in times of consolation, we love to pray. We love to be in church. We love to be before the Eucharist. We love to dedicate our lives to Christ and to the gospel. Its counterpart, and exact contrary, is spiritual desolation. And this is a heavy movement of the heart on the level of our spiritual life and relationship with God. Darkness of soul. Everything's confused. I can't make sense. Months are going by and I don't know what's going on, with a heavy sense that things are not going well. Disturbance. All the peace is gone. Movement to low and earthly things. In consolation, the attraction is upward toward heavenly things. In the heaviness of spiritual desolation, the attraction is toward low and earthly things. And again, I can't say too often that there is no shame in experiencing this. This is simply what it means to live the spiritual life in a fallen and redeemed and loved world. What matters is be aware, be discerning, understand, and in this case, reject. So these would be the times in which, rather than reach out for prayer, here is a man who ends his day maybe around 10 each evening with a brief reading from Scripture, an examination of conscience, and maybe he looks at the readings for the next day's Mass. But today things didn't go well in the morning. There's been a heaviness in his heart. He's already let his usual prayer slip. And now he sits, and before his hand here is the Scripture, and before his hand here is the smartphone, and everything in him now feels the pull toward low and earthly things, just to get on the web, and he knows where that can go. There is no shame in experiencing this. What matters so much is to be aware, to understand what's going on, and to know in this case that this is the tactic of the enemy, simply to be rejected. What if this man reaches out that evening for the Bible? How will his evening end? How will he rise the next morning? And what if, sadly, he does reach out for the smartphone? How will his evening end? How will he rise the next morning? Can you see that living the discerning life matters? This is all about, when I originally wrote the book, my title was not the title that it now has, which is a better title. The editor explained to me that you get the key search words into titles these days because everything's internet driven. My title was biblical, Setting Captives Free, from Luke 4. When Jesus tells the people in the synagogue, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He has anointed me to preach good news to the poor, to proclaim liberty to captives and let the oppressed go free." Setting captives free. That's what these 14 rules can do, because Jesus did not call us to captivity of that kind. He came to set captives free. If that man in his room at 10 o'clock that evening can have his eyes open just a little and say, wait a minute, he's aware. You know what? There's spiritual desolation. He understands it. And you know what? God's call here is to firmly reject it and reaches out for the Bible. A captive is set free. And this can happen in our lives. Disquiet from various agitations and temptations, lack of confidence, nothing's going to work out. Lack of hope, why should I pray today? Nothing's going to happen. I don't feel God's love. Feel totally slothful, tepid, and sad. No energy for spiritual things. And feel as if, because it's not true, but feel as if separated from one's Creator and Lord. Rule 5. Ignatius says, if I know I am in a time of spiritual desolation, then I should never, in a time of spiritual desolation, make any change to any part of my spiritual life. The way I pray, spiritual direction, retreats that I'm making, engagement in the parish, and the rest. Let me say these words to you, these 8 words that have blessed men and women for 500 years. These 8 words will get you safely through almost any darkness you may experience in life. In time of desolation, never make a change. I'll say them again, say them with me if you will. In time of desolation, never make a change. Let's do it once more. In time of desolation, never make a change. I have people now who come back to me 10, 15 years after we've gone through these rules. And somehow it's one of these graces that God has given the church through Ignatius. People don't forget Rule 5. And they'll tell me repeatedly how much that rule has helped them get through darkness in their life. Someday I want to see a t-shirt which says, I heart Rule 5. I'd love to see everybody in the church wear one of those. We don't change our spiritual proposals, but we change the way we're facing the desolation, increasing our prayer, meditation, examining it to see what's going on, and rather than giving in to low and earthly things, making suitable acts of penance. In Rule 7, Ignatius invites the person who is in desolation to think and consider that this is not meaningless pain. This is a trial from God. And the reason for the trial is so that the person have the opportunity to resist it, and by resisting, grow in the ability to resist it. Because, Ignatius says, remember, at 10 o'clock as this man sits at his desk, or any one of us, you can resist spiritual desolation because God's grace is always sufficiently with you. Rule 8, work to be in patience. I was going to make a holy hour today. It's desolate. I'm not shortening the time. I'm going to be patient. Stay the course. And what will help is to remember that consolation will return. Desolation, the lie of it, is that it's always going to be like this. The truth is, consolation will always return, and diligently use the means. In Rule 9, Ignatius helps us understand why a God who loves us allows us to go through times of spiritual desolation. I'm trying to love and serve the Lord. Couldn't the Lord spare me these dark times? And Ignatius explains 3 different reasons for which a God who loves us will permit us to undergo spiritual desolation. If there are negligences or faults on our part in our spiritual life, the desolation helps us see them and make the necessary changes. Sometimes when we're not at fault at all, God allows it as a trial because of the growth that will come. And finally, when we are in desolation, we know clearly that consolation is God's gift, and that roots us in a rich humility. Rule 10, when we are in consolation, we can be preparing and storing up strength for the desolation to follow. Rule 11, Ignatius brings it all together, inviting us in time of consolation not to be naively and carelessly high, but to be humble in time of consolation. And in desolation, not to be despairingly low, but confident and trusting in God. And this is how we go forward in the spiritual life. Humble in consolation, trusting in desolation, we go forward solidly. And in the last 3 rules, Ignatius describes 3 qualities of the way the enemy works in his temptations, so that by knowing these, we're going to be able to resist them firmly when we experience them. Stand firm in the beginning. When is it easiest to resist a temptation? When the man is poised to reach out for the smartphone in a way that he knows is not going to be good. When is it easiest for him to resist that temptation? In the very beginning, before he even reaches out to touch the screen the first time. And you and I all know that after the 5th touch and the 50th and the 100th, it gets harder and harder. If you and I, when we know we are experiencing the enemy's temptations, can remain firm right in the very beginning, the rest of it will never even happen. Rule 12 can set us free from an enormous amount of burdens in our lives. Rule 13, I said earlier that Rule 5 would get you safely through almost any darkness in life. And now I'll complete that by saying Rule 5 and Rule 13 together will get you safely through any darkness at all you may ever experience in life. Don't make changes in the desolation, and speak with a competent and wise spiritual person. Those 2 things will get you safely through any struggle or sorrow in life. Because what the enemy is going to try to say to you, here is a burden in my heart. When I want to feel close to the Lord and I feel the Lord's closeness, that God wants to pour out his love, I would be so free to accept it except for this burden in my heart, which I've never spoken of to anyone. And what the enemy will say is you can't talk about it, because as long as we don't talk about it, the burden will go on. What Ignatius says is find a wise, competent spiritual person and put it into words. Break the spiritual silence, and the enemy will be undone. One of the happiest things in my priestly ministry and spiritual direction and retreats is to watch this happen. When people, sometimes with great courage, are able to put spiritual burdens into words, you see before your eyes captives set free. And finally, there is for each of us a place where the enemy most habitually attacks and tries to discourage and weaken and dishearten us. This is the thing that happens when you and I say, this always seems to happen. I always seem to wind up here spiritually. This is Rule 14 terrain. And if we can identify what that is, again, there's no shame in experiencing any of this. We all have this. If we can identify what that point is and work to strengthen it, here too, the enemy is undone. So these are 14 guidelines which are all about setting captives free. They've been setting men and women free in the spiritual journey for the 500 years since Ignatius wrote them. And my prayer is that they will contribute to set all of us free, free to love and follow the Lord. Amen. Amen. So we have some questions.
Yes, Father. Thank you very much for your presentation. It's always very helpful. A little bit more explanation during a day when we're working and we kind of forget and go from consolation to desolation. What's the best kind of practical way to maintain and to promote the consolation?
The best way is to be aware of what's happening, to notice what's going on, and then to start using the tools that Ignatius gives us here. Now, this is why, if we really want to live the discerning life, if we really want the wisdom of Ignatius to come, as you're saying, into our daily lives, what we're going to want is at least a brief time of prayer each day to be noticing, to be aware, to get in touch with what's going on. And this is what St. Ignatius called the examined prayer, so that we might find it helpful. The rules for the discernment are the what is it. The examined prayer is, how do I bring this into everyday life? So it might be very helpful to explore that, a time each day when I'm noticing what's going on. Okay? Then we start praying, we talk to a wise spiritual person, we can use all the means. But the first thing is just to be aware that it's going on. If we're not aware, it can go on and on. Let me say this reverently, it can go on for months and even years. Jesus did not call us to that kind of captivity. He came to set captives free, and the first step is just like Ignatius, to have our eyes opened a little and to notice. Then the rest can follow.
Father, in the area of seeking spiritual direction, does one need to find a spiritual director? And if so, how does one go about seeking a spiritual director to apply these? I like the menu list, but how do we go about applying it in our daily situations? Thank you.
Okay, very real question. The principle is that for Ignatius, we are never alone on the spiritual journey. That we are always in some way accompanied. That's why Jesus founded a church. We're not meant to be alone on the spiritual journey. And so, the point would be to find a way to be accompanied. Now, the way that you mentioned is obvious. It'd be the first of the ways, I would say. If we can find a personal spiritual director, a wise and competent spiritual person with whom to be able to meet regularly, that would be a wonderful thing. So if we can find that as we get to know different priests or different people who have the background to be spiritual directors, and we get a sense that this person might be a fit, we begin to ask and so on. Now, I know sometimes that can be difficult because there is more desire for spiritual direction generally than there are spiritual directors. So let's be looking at the many ways that it is possible for us to be accompanied if we're not able to find spiritual direction. Never underestimate the sacrament of confession. Regular confession is for most people the one place where we're going to be able to say, even if just a bit, in a one-on-one setting, something about what's happening in our spiritual life. And if we find a confessor who may be willing to say, even if it's only a few sentences, something that will clarify or encourage us, regular confession with that kind of confessor can do a great deal to assist us in the spiritual journey and in living the discerning life. Sometimes on a level that has no pretense at all of being spiritual direction, but just friends in the Lord. I've seen sometimes groups of people, friends, just get together every so often, just talk to each other, or just call each other up on the phone just to talk about the spiritual journey. You know, what if in the case that we just had, a person were to put into words to another, I've found myself in some desolation today, and this is why. Just getting a chance to talk it out with a friend is an enormously helpful thing. I remember a woman telling me that she and friends of hers would get together every Saturday morning for breakfast to do this kind of thing. Husbands and wives, where this is possible, where both share the spiritual journey, can be an enormous encouragement the one to the other in this. So there can be many different groups in a parish and so on. There can be many different ways. The more accompaniment we find, the easier and happier we're going to find it to live the discerning life. So thank you.
Well, the steps are very appealing, but what would happen, is it possible to get up to the 12th or 13th step and then mess up? Would you have to go back to step 1 and 2? work back up?
The answer to that is absolutely yes. One of the blessings in my life is that I get to talk about these rules so many times each year, and I need to keep hearing them, keep being reminded of them. Oh yes, certainly, we're going to slip up on these. But what we need to do is keep walking. There's a sentence in John of the Cross's writing where he says, on this journey, the spiritual life, on this journey, we must always keep walking if we are to arrive. Just don't give up. Stay with it. With all the ups and downs and struggles, and I slipped into desolation and didn't even notice it in rest, but now I see it. If you just stay the course, we're going to gradually grow. Ignatius himself, if you know his life, made one of his first discernments before he even made that first confession by letting the mule decide which turn in the road it was going to take. That's a pretty basic level of discernment. He had a lot of growing to do. Thank God the mule made the right choice. Or Ignatius' life would have been very different. But this is a gradual growth. It's like the life of prayer. By staying at it day after day, year after year in our lives, gradually this grows. And then what happens is we find ourselves picking up more and more. And our response becomes increasingly quick. And we are increasingly set free. Yes?
What would happen if you were to not have confession for a long time?
If a person does not have confession for a long time, through no fault of that person's, let's call to mind, for example, you remember Saint Damien, the saint on Molokai. There was no other priest. He couldn't get to confession for long periods of time. Or if a person is ill or shut in and so on, and simply can't get to confession, then that person is not going to lose grace before God. If a person can get to regular confession, then obviously, as the New Catechism says, the Church warmly encourages that. Because each time we go, and I think we all know this by experience, each time we leave the confessional, our hearts are just that much lighter, just that much freer, just that much more ready to serve the Lord. So that if a person doesn't go to confession, when a person could go in a regular way, the person will be missing some of that grace. So the warm encouragement would be to go faithfully and regularly to confession. I think time is up, and so we'll conclude here. God's blessings.